Good afternoon. My name is Charles Gray. I'm here at Four Corners Farm in South Newbury, Vermont, and we're going to be talking about mustard and how we incorporate it and use it here on the farm to help rejuvenate and extend our season, both in the beginning and the end of the year. We have a lot of crops here that require a lot of energy from the soil, and we've learned over the years that if you take care of the soil, it will take care of you. So adding mustard to our already busy program definitely has been a benefit over the last 8 years. There was a lot of learning curve from starting from seeding to when to mow it, to when to water it, to when to till it, when to roll it, and all the other things in between. So over this next video, I'm going to explain to you step by step on how to do this and why we do it here at Four Corners Farm. The first step will be ground prep. Second step will be seeding. Third step will be incorporating the product after you've grown it. And the final step will be tilling and sealing the soil so that you can take this wonderful mustard, chop it all up, and feed your soil and have a bountiful crop the following year. Yeah, first step would be obviously get your ground prepped.
All right.
Not too fluffy because the brilliant will just pile out in front of it.
Yeah.
And then since these cedars are old and mustard's new, you would open up the cedar, look at your seeding chart on your brilliant. We're using a brilliant here, a little 4-foot brilliant. We would use a small box. This is the large box, this is the small box. So you can, two options. You can either just take your 50 pound bag of seed and fill up your small box tray and then go seed. But to tell how much you need per acre, the best way to do it is to have your acre of land or your half acre of land come to your small box. Here's your mustard seed. So mustard is around the size of a clover, maybe a little bigger than a clover seed. So I'll come to the small box here, look for my clovers. You're wanting to seed about 10 to 12, depending on the quality of your soil. Sandier, I would go a little more. I would go higher to 12. If you're more of a clay or a silty loam, I would go closer to 9. So look here for clover, for about 10 pounds, we're in between 4 and 6. So then you come over here on your 4-foot brilliant, and you would, it's not completely accurate, but just I would go right in between 5 and 6. Close your lid. Put your top down, make sure to put it into gear. Get on your tractor, make sure the brake's off. First gear, a little bit of throttle, high range. We're on L245, so I'd go first gear high range. It's about 3.5 miles an hour. And have it engaged, cedars down, and then go straight. Now you've seeded, wait 45 days to 60 depending on the weather. With this hot weather in July, if you plant end of June, by the middle of August you'll be able to have mustard that is at least 6 feet tall. This was planted just before Memorial Day. We were able to get in here. So this is the one trickiest thing about here is if you want to take a crop off before you put your mustard in, you won't have enough time to get your fall cash crop in, whatever you're planting. So treat this like an actual cash crop and fertilize, water it, plant it all just like you would be planting strawberries, potatoes, or sweet corn. So out of all the pieces of machinery we have here to do the mustard, the most crucial piece of machinery is a flail mower. People have asked me, can I use a bush hog? Can I use a lawnmower? You possibly could, but because once you chop this and that pheromone, that chemical that's in these seeds and in this green crop, once it releases, you only have about 20 minutes before the air, also depending on the conditions, the air will just dissipate into the air and you will lose it. So that's where, with this machine, you can chop it instantaneously, and then within that 20 minutes, you've already done enough for that person to come in and till behind you. And where we've tried before, we tried Flail Mowing twice to get the chop a little finer, but because it takes so long to get to the right size and because it dissipates so fast that you'll lose your gas. So it's better to go a little slower speed in the tractor and a higher RPM and really make sure it doesn't plug very often, and get this into this fine material, so that when you chop it up and put it into the ground, it's all ready to go. This is a 8-foot Kuhn flail chopper, and this one doesn't need a 70 horsepower tractor. This one can get run with about anywhere from about 40 probably is a minimum up. So just because you see the large tractors here needed to power the implements, you don't need large power tractors. You just need implements that can fit onto the tractor. You could scale this down, get the 4-footer, put it on a 25 to 35 horsepower tractor with your tiller behind, and you would be fine. All right, now we'll start this piece of machinery up and we'll make some noise. Tractor's all started. We'll do PTO on. Make sure when you're doing this that people stand back at least at 12 or 13 feet, because it does shoot projectiles out the back of the flail mower. And we'll crank it up to just under 540. Usually I'll run it right around 500 to 510. Low range, usually second or third, depending on the quality of the crop. Now then you just go. You'll just let it go and it will chop. You can choose your depth. You don't want to go all the way down and hit dirt, because then you'll bung up the flail chopper and you'll lose that in productivity. So usually just skimming the surface, slow enough that it can chop off the top of the stalks of the mustard. And as the same thing, flail mower takes a long time to slow down after it's gotten started. So turn everything off and let it sit until everything has stopped spinning. All right, so now that you're on to the flail mowing step or process of growing your mustard, we're going to come down to ground level. We have now just flail mowed 100 feet of this. So you're cutting it off just above the stalk growth, chopping everything else up, and then spitting it behind you. Since we are about 4 or 5 days behind the optimum cutting time, but because all the rain over the last week, we weren't able to get in here. So it's still better to do it late than to do too early. Because if you get it before any of these seeds have even formed, there's not really enough juice in the plant to cause that gas effect. Once this lower set of seed pods starts forming flowers, start planting your fumigation within the week. Because it will take, depending on the weather, especially with these hot July days and a lot of rain, this will go from fully flowered to just a flower and a tip in about 7 days. So if you can catch anywhere between this sort of flowering zone on mustard, you'll have enough gas from the flowers and also the seeds forming, and the stalks won't dry off like they've done here. You'll get the most amount of mustard gas possible to put in the ground. Where if you wait, like we did because of the rain, we've lost a little bit here because it's dried out. And then same thing up top, we've lost a little bit because the mustard seed pods have started to form, and you've lost that juice and the flavorness of the flowers. So after you've grown it to the correct time and you've started to mow it down, you can look behind you, and you don't want to hit dirt, because then you're going to bring up dirt and cover some of the mustard, and it won't chop it as fine as you want. So you want to be able to cut it off just at the top and have it be almost like a mat of chopped up mustard behind you. So that way, when you switch over to the large tractor to start putting it under the ground, the tractor doesn't have to work as hard. you can see here where I've done it before, I was a little too high on the flail mower, so I left a lot of stock. So if you're at the right height with the flail mower, you'll leave just the right amount of stock. So when you come through with your tiller, it will pick up that stock and it will put it under. The crucial step in growing mustard is after you flail mow to get it in the ground as fast as possible. It's going to take a few times to do this and to practice it. I still don't have it right. Every now and then, depending on the conditions and depending on the hands on deck that I can have help me, I'll miss that 20-minute window. So sometimes what I'll do is if you're just one person and you want to be able to do the whole thing, you're going to start on this side of the field with the flail mower and you're going to flail mow your way all the way across. You're going to have to accept the fact that the first 10 feet, probably on either side, you're going to lose your mustard gas. But as you move further into the field, it's going to get better and better. So by the time you get to the last, depending on the size of your field, that 2/3 in the middle, that will all be fumigated correctly. And if you're only one person, it's a lot easier to do that, except the fact that, okay, maybe I'll have to double fumigate another year, come in and do those sections again, but a majority of the field will be fumigated correctly. Because sometimes what I've done in the past is you set a 20-minute timer, do 1-2 passes and hop in the tractor and switch to the other one. So if you're one person and you don't have a tiller and you have a flail mower, I would recommend getting probably like a 10-foot harrow, because you can, this is a 6-foot flail mower, you can almost double your pass. So by the time you get done flail mowing, sure, yes, you'll lose a little gas on the outside, but 80% or 70% of the field will be done correctly, and it will be a little more efficient than hot seeding from one tractor to another. We'll jump back to so there's a few important steps in growing mustard. The first step is getting the right kind. We're growing Caliente 199. It is not the hottest mustard you could grow anymore. There are other varieties out there now that are hotter than this, but this will run you $2 to $5 a pound. These new hotter mustards are running anywhere from $8 to $12 for a pound of seed. So I stick with the Caliente 199 because it's relatively cheap. It's really incredibly easy to grow. So the three major things that you do not forget is seed rate, water, and that 20-minute window you have after flail mowing. So in the earlier years that we were doing this, what we would mess up on is not getting water on after you seed to get a good germination, because it takes about 2 weeks for a mustard seed to germinate and get into at least a 2-leaf or 4-leaf stage. Once it gets into that stage, it gets enough sunlight and if it has enough moisture, then it will grow and shade out everything around it. So in that 2-week period, especially where the mustard we're on right now is on very, very sandy soil. So now I make sure after you seed to come in with overhead irrigation. If you don't have overhead irrigation, make sure you plan your mustard seedings around the rainstorms. So if you know it's going to rain, go out there and plant your mustard so you know that next morning or that next day, it'll get rained on, get watered in, and be germinated. A few things that you should keep aware of when planting mustard. It works best by planting it through a brillion instead of a grain drill, because it's only about the smaller than a grain of sand or a grain of rice. It only needs maybe a 1/2 inch of soil depth to be covered up to have enough to germinate and grow. I think the rule of thumb is it's 4 times the diameter of the seed. So if it's a 2-millimeter seed, it only needs 8 to 10 millimeters planted to have enough soil covering it that it will grow. So, and these will all be things you'll learn in your first trials of growing mustard, is that you're not going to get the water on because you're too busy doing something else, and it's only going to be a partial germination. But don't abandon it. Sometimes I've come through and either brillioned over the top or just given it some water and let it grow, and this one plant will create enough foliage. This one plant will create enough foliage that that your stalks will be bigger. They'll be almost, I think they were almost the size of quarters the time we did it. And we were able to rescue the field, and it came up and it actually grew a pretty good crop of mustard. So one more thing you have to worry about with mustard is it makes a great pollinator crop. You'll have plenty of natural and your local and any other pollinators on your farm will be attracted to this crop. So during blossom is one of the best times to put it under, as we were talking about, but it's also when it's full of bees and every other insect that wants to eat some of it. So the best time to do this mustard is either in the evening or in the first thing in the morning before the bees come out. Because I have flail mown this, tried to do it during the day or after a rainstorm, and the bees have come out and you're literally flail mowing a swarm of bees in front of the tractor. And eventually they'll start getting underneath and getting sucked through, and it's just not a great way to treat your pollinators that do so much here on the farm. So the best time to put this mustard in is either first thing in the morning or in the evening. I prefer the evening because you'll get, if it's a really dewy night, you'll get that morning dew to help compact some of the soil. Especially when it's sandy like this, it will just, if it's too dry, you can just see the gases dissipate. Now that you've prepped your ground, seeded your ground, planted, made sure that you had a good germination, also fed all the pollinators, and hit your flail mowing on time, so you just have this nice chewy poultice of mustard to put under. It's time to hop into your tiller or harrow. I have used harrows in the past, and for some crops it works really, really well afterwards. But if you have the time to till, it's the time to till, and we'll do that now. It doesn't matter what your tiller looks like, as long as it takes dirt and takes debris and buries it. That is what you're trying to do. You're trying to take this freshly chopped, moist, great material and put it in the ground and feed the soil. So here we have a 96-inch tiller. We put the tines on it, new tines on it about 2 years ago. It does a pretty good job. Depending on the compaction of the soil, harrows work pretty good because you can just come in with the harrow and you can just flip this over and just cover it. So if you're doing a big long field, let's say 5 to 10 acres or 2 to 5 acres, but it has enough room that you can let that harrow out, harrow it and come back in. If you're doing small plots here and there on your farm, I definitely would recommend a tiller. Same thing. This is a 100 horsepower tractor and a 96-inch tiller. You don't need this big of a machine to do it. Depending on your acreage, you could go with a small tiller, or you can always just go, all the way down to a BCS. The biggest thing that we're trying to do here is get this mustard into the soil. Now that you've gotten to the portion to till, you're gonna turn your tiller on. But you can never raise your tiller up all the way because your PTO shaft will bind. And remember that you're wanting to cover rather than chew. So I'll run my tiller a little bit back, not too far back that things are off center, but a little far back so that the flaps will actually kind of press down. Same thing with a tiller. I'll crank almost right up to 540. Don't mind our loose tine. Put the tiller down. Will be low range, first or second gear, depending on their soil conditions. I usually go first gear. The slower you go, the better the till, but it takes more time. So usually a mid-gear in the low ranges is nice. And there you go. So after you've flail mowed and now tilled, you can see that we've incorporated this debris. As you can see though beforehand, where you had this nice green debris on one side and dirt on the other. So you know that this, as you dig down, is down there almost 6 or 7 inches under the soil. And as this decays over the next couple weeks, it's going to keep releasing its gas because you got it in enough time that it didn't dry out. That's the crucial about getting this mustard chop under the soil within that 20 minutes after chopping it. Because every minute that it's above, it's just going to lose gas. And that's why a lot of people will ask, because this is the crucial step. They'll be like, oh, I planted mustard, I followed the instructions, but nothing happened. 2 weeks later, I had just as many weeds and I wasted all that time and energy on that field. And that's all that comes to, is there was something along the way from all the different things that could go wrong, from seeding to not getting a good germination rate, to not having enough moisture to feed that crop throughout the year, to maybe not putting enough fertilizer or enough manure on. This all got manured in our prep before we planted the mustard. Or to maybe flail mowing too high like I did here, right? I flail mowed way too high from this pass. So I look at how much mustard that I didn't chop up. So these are all crucial steps. So this may not be a great fumigation because I missed a step here and there, but I know the majority, this field had enough foliage that I know if I leave a little bit behind like this, as long as this goes in the ground, and maybe even the tillers will help break it up a little bit so that you don't have to worry about losing too much. These are all small things that will eventually add up to not getting the desired product or to the desired results that you were looking for. But don't let it discourage you, and just work on these things. And over the years, eventually you will start honing them so that you're only losing maybe 5 to 10% of your gas rather than losing to 50 to 100% depending on the soils. All right, now that you've come on to the final step of mustard, is one of the most important, is to seal that ground. Because hopefully you've done everything right to this point and you've put at least 70 to 80% of the gas into the soil. So if you're a small market gardener, a farm stand, or you don't have a lot of acreage, and let's say you just did a 100-foot row to try, you can chop it down with your weed whacker, you could till it with your BCS, and you could either roll it by stepping on it, maybe pulling a log, get another person and pull a log over it just to have that weight to smear it flat and pack it down. Or if you don't have any of those options, a tarp or a piece of plastic to cover it, anything to keep those gases from escaping. The best ways to do it is either overhead irrigation, using the brilliant that you planted the crop with, or purchasing a roller. We've been using an old land roller that I'll show you later for the last few years, and I was finally done with pulling this thing around. So I went and I purchased myself a custom cultipacker from a company down in Tennessee, and they made it last fall and brought it up. So now, with all its self-lift and everything, I can come in and I can roll 10 feet of ground. It's really, really easy now. So this is a new purchase that I bought this year for prepping fields and putting mustard under, and I'm super excited about it. Same thing. You do not need a high horsepower tractor to do this. This is a 50 horsepower, so about the half as much as that. But you could even go down to a 25 or a 15, depending on the size of your cultipacker. Now that you've gotten to the final step, this is one of the more enjoyable steps because you don't have to worry about the level of the flail mower or how deep you're tilling. All you have to do is make sure your wheels are up. Make sure your wheels are up and roll. We're back again, and we're talking about you've done all the field prep. You may have harrowed or field cultivated or tilled it multiple times to really get it a clean bed before you plant your mustard seed. And what will happen is you can do all of that, but your weed seed bed can be so strong, and if that mustard doesn't get its 2-week window to really jump out of the ground and start growing, you're going to have problems like this, where you're going to have huge fields. In our case, pigweed is our biggest problem here. The mustard's still in there and it's trying to grow, but the pigweed is just choking it out. So this would be if you were to catch this a little bit earlier, you could come in, if you're commercial, and you could come in and come in with some urea or something really to boost the mustard. The mustard loves nitrogen. It can take almost as much as you can give it. Which, as the pigweed slows down, as it becomes starting into its cone and starts its sort of final stages, in most cases, the mustard will grow out of it and shade it out. And this was all planted 5.5 setting on the Brilliant, so right about 10 pounds to the acre. But we got a little rainstorm afterwards, so we didn't bring any pipe in. This is just low input. I tilled the ground, I seeded it to mustard, and we will let it grow. But because our weed pressure is so strong here, the pigweed had a chance to come in. But the mustard will, there's enough mustard and it's thick enough in here that it will shadow out the pigweed. And as you can see, now we're on to we were dealing with 6-foot mustard strands up above. Now we're only on, a 3.5 foot. And as you can see, as the flower pods are starting to form. So now it will start down here, this will become a seed pod, and then so on and so on. And if it's not a great crop, or if it's not a strong crop, and you're like, it never really got to the flowering that like you talked about, I would, when this one has formed a seed pod, when your bottom one has formed a seed pod, I would put it under, if you can't quite tell when to do it. So as we walk further into the field, we'll get through the pigweed section. So you can see that it's here. And it has enough vigor that it will, as soon as these next leaves come out and grow, these will eventually shade out some of these. And coming back in 2 weeks, this pigweed that's sort of suffering and that's down at the bottom, this will all be covered up and the mustard will be yellow right on top. And since we're flail mowing and barrowing, you don't really have to worry about the weed seeds becoming viable. You're going to bring them right to that point and then put that field under. That's where you're going to have to make the call as a farmer, is if your mustard crop got so inundated with your local native weeds that you're not going to be able to take it all the way to the perfect point to put it under, put that field under early and mark that in your notes that, okay, next year I either got to get that mustard in early, or I got to do a first early spring fallowing and let everything grow, put it under, and then plant your mustard to get ahead of it. Because that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to suppress the weeds. Some people use mustards for nematode control and soil-borne diseases and all other things. Here at Four Corners Farm, we are trying just to combat our weed problem over the years. So we had to come to another field that's a little farther, little bit behind the field we were at originally. But this is when you're looking at when to put your mustard under, this is almost perfect. You still have flowers up here on the top, so you know that almost none of these seed pods have started to mature yet. And if we were to pull it up by the stalk, you can see that it's starting to dry off. You're losing some of your green, but it still has plenty of moisture down here. So when you go to flail chop this, you're going to get almost 50% more moisture out of your stalk than you would if you were to wait any longer. So if you're really looking at when to put your mustard under, this is almost perfect time. So you still have plenty of soft, light tissue up here on the top. All these flower buds will have moisture, and then all the way down through to your base. None of these seeds are viable, so you'll chop them up and you'll have plenty of time. This mustard is going to be really fun to chop. That smell, this is going to fumigate twice as much as it would if you were to wait any longer. But the other stuff will still have it in it. It just requires you to get it in the ground a lot faster. Where this, because at this stage and what it is right now, it has enough gas that you have just a couple more minutes, probably 10, 15 more minutes than you would if you were to wait any longer and get it and have it be dried out at all. I'm Charles Gray, and thank you so much for tuning in and learning something about mustard today. We're here at Four Corners Farm. We're always trying to innovate into the future. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.